Hi guys, welcome to the channel. Welcome back. I want to talk about Dahmer, Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story. I really am dying to talk about this because I heard so much negative stuff about this show, around this show. I watched a bunch of video essays about this show, complaining about its existence. I finally buckled and I watched it because I'm very curious about the Menendez Brothers show that is coming out soon as part of this like Monsters series produced by Ryan Murphy. I am pleasantly surprised to say that I really enjoyed Dahmer. I was expecting something a lot more distasteful, a lot more navel gazy and voyeuristic and kind of like thirst trappy and icky, because based on the criticism I'd been hearing in these video essays and on TikTok and like the discourse around it, I was really expecting it to be as unsubtle and tasteless as some of the later American Horror Story seasons. And I thought maybe that approach wasn't the most appropriate thing for Jeffrey Dahmer, given the fact that it was obviously a true story. I am pleasantly surprised to say that I thought this was an incredibly tasteful, for like 95% of it. There are some things we will talk about, but I thought this was an incredibly tasteful series. I thought the acting in the series was absolutely incredible, particularly Evan Peters and Richard Jenkins. I also thought the way the show was structured was genuinely fantastic. I think in terms of non-linear storytelling, I've seen Red Letter Media talk about the fact that they think the kind of non-linear structure hurt the show or didn't do much for the show. I have to completely disagree. I think in terms of jumping around in timelines, this is some of the best I've seen it done. I'm currently watching American Crime Story, The Assassination of Gianni Versace, and I think the way the kind of jump around storytelling is done in that is really clunky compared to how well it is done in Dahmer. Also, on top of that, for a Netflix show, this show looks incredible. It's well paced. Every episode, for the most part, feels really important. There's been a lot of discourse around why it should exist. I hate to say it, people are interested in this sort of stuff. That's as deep as it goes. It seems like everyone nowadays has a true crime fascination. This is a really intense one. It's a very dark and broody one. However, I will say, in terms of the graphic content, I was pleasantly surprised at how restrained this was. I think a lot of the reason this show has an R rating here in Australia, which is the equivalent of American NC-17, the reason it has such a strong age recommendation is I think just the conversations that I had about what Jeffrey Dahmer did and what he wanted to do, as well as just kind of this suffocating, oppressive tone that the show has running throughout it. That first episode, nothing incredibly horrifically graphic happens, but there's a threat of it. You know, if you know who Jeffrey Dahmer is, you kind of know where this could go for the lead character, the victim in this first episode. And it's just this oppressive, crushing tone. And I actually think that is probably a lot of the reason this show got its maturity rating, because it's just such a grim, bleak, dark show. There is not much beauty to be found in this show. There is not much redemption. And kind of these little pockets and moments you get of kind of emotional relief or catharsis are tinged in this really sad, dark reality that it will eventually get back to. You know, you actually get sucked into the kind of love story, friendship between Tony Hughes and Jeffrey Dahmer that is portrayed in, I believe, episode 6. And throughout that episode, you get really sucked in. You're like sitting there like, oh my God, like Jeffrey Dahmer's finally found someone he can connect with. And then you remember who Jeffrey Dahmer is. You remember everything he's done, and you remember where this is inevitably going to go. And I think the episode works so well because it actually feels like a episode of the Tony Hughes show that Jeffrey Dahmer makes an appearance in, and then Jeffrey Dahmer takes that over. So to explain further, every other episode, it does feel like it is following Jeffrey Dahmer's world for the most part. Jeffrey Dahmer is the focus. People come in and out of his life, but he is the driving force. And in episode 6, they take a different approach. It shows Tony Hughes's birth. They give us a speed run of Tony Hughes's life. We almost forget we are watching Dahmer for a bit. And by the time Dahmer shows up in the bar in episode 6, it's this heartbreaking kind of tragedy where you're like, oh yeah, this is the show we're watching. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say I completely forgot the show I was watching. Like, of course I was sitting there going like, oh my God, when is Dahmer going to show up? but his appearance almost feels ethereal and like this awful curse that is like laid upon Tony. It's so well executed. I really struggled with this episode with how it ended, because initially I thought there were so many interesting, fascinating ways to end it. You could have ended it with the mum crying at the table, realizing that Tony Hughes isn't coming home. You could have had it end at Tony Hughes knocking on the door and being like, oh, I just forgot something. And then the implication being obviously that Dahmer kills him, because we saw that in the way this episode is kind of out of order. We already had that confirmed. So many interesting ways you could have ended this episode that feel very Tony focused and very kind of emotionally involved in Tony's story rather than Dahmer's story. However, I think the choice to not end it when the mum is crying, not end it when Tony shows back up at the apartment, not end it when Tony's sitting there telling the rest of his family what his dreams are, or going out for the night where he is murdered by Dahmer, but instead ending it with Dahmer eating him, right? That's how the episode ends. It ends with Dahmer eating a piece of Tony Hughes. It's dark and almost feels tasteless, and it's very confronting. But I think it does a really good job of displaying how Dahmer basically took over the story of the victims. He took over their lives, right? When people think back on who Tony Hughes was, it is forever tied to Jeffrey Dahmer, and that is visualized in the most blunt, brutal, and haunting way. And I know it's as subtle as a sledgehammer to the teeth, but this is what he did. This is what happened in real life. And I think the initial distaste I had for the ending, or the initial discomfort, was entirely intentional. I think you are meant to sit there and be really put off. And I think the way this show reckons with the fact that Dahmer is this like huge, larger than life figure, he's the stuff of legends in a weird way. And what that does to the victims and what that says about us as a society, I think the show actually has a lot of really interesting things to say. You know, later in the season, right, the show starts kind of exploring and making commentary on the fact that like society made Dahmer a hero. There were people bidding over his belongings, bidding over his couch, bidding over like any objects that could have been involved in any of these horrific murders. There's also people writing him love letters, writing him like, you know, thirst trap letters, sending him like nude photos, sending him money. He had like a fan base. And this show very much explores the fact that he became a hero rather than the victims. And it is obviously asking us to examine our own relationship with Dahmer by watching the show. And I saw a lot of no-brain takes online basically being like, oh, the show has the audacity to complain about this, but then, you know, look at them. They're making a show all about it. And it's like, I mean, yes, but I don't think that's the clever point you think it is. The show is trying to basically tell you the full story of Dahmer, including pre, during, and post his life, pre, during, and post his murders. The show literally ends with his brain being burnt, you know, weeks later after the rest of his body was buried. The show is very much interested in being the kind of be-all and end-all Dahmer story. If you want a really big, expansive insight into what that was like, this is what the show is for. And I think it's weird to complain that the show is going to explore that angle and kind of call it out for its hypocrisy. Because in my opinion, I was expecting a lot worse in terms of the empathy the show built for Dahmer, as well as what the show would have done in terms of making him seem like a hero or a legend. I do not think the show really does this at all. Yes, if you have basic human empathy, before Jeffrey Dahmer has killed people, it sucks to see him get bullied in school and not fit in and not be able to socialize effectively. That's just basic humanity. Anyone as an audience member is going to empathize that. You know, the same way if there was a John Wayne Gacy series, you know, initially if that episode started and it was 5-year-old John Wayne Gacy being beat up by his dad, we would feel bad for young John Wayne Gacy, but we would not feel bad for older John Wayne Gacy that dresses up as a clown and murders boys. And in my opinion, I think the show gives you plenty of empathy for Jeffrey Dahmer in his early stages. His family life is awful, like actively awful. Particularly in my opinion, I thought his mum was like horrific. But at a certain point, and I think from the first murder, I lost all empathy for him. I didn't have that much empathy at all. I don't know what people are watching the show other than people that would have already be simping over him and seeing him as a hero and a legend anyway, I don't think most rational people are going to watch Monster Dahmer, the Jeffrey Dahmer story or whatever it's called, and actually feel that bad for him and feel like what he did was justified or understandable by any means. I think the people that think this and have this response of feeling bad for Jeffrey Dahmer or thinking he was hard done by are weird people. And they probably would have felt like this regardless of the Netflix show, in my opinion, because I, going into it, was really worried that they were going to make him seem just this empathetic, tragic character, and every single thing was because he didn't feel loved, and every single guy like threatened to abuse him or called him a freak, and it was reactionary. But absolutely not. There are multiple murders that are framed as cruel and planned and calculated. On top of that, Jeffrey Dahmer throughout this series is portrayed as incredibly manipulative rather than dumb and kind of socially unaware. Early on in the show, I felt like, oh, okay, he doesn't really understand social cues. He's not quite right in the head. They're exploring nature versus nurture, and maybe he was just messed up as a child and just doesn't understand the world. Like something's not quite right. Now, obviously, there is something not quite right with Jeffrey Dahmer. But at a certain point in the series, he's lying to people, he's being manipulative, he's being cruel. Like you even see this in the relationship with his dad, right? His dad is constantly seen there being, Jeff, why'd you do that? Jeff, why'd you do this? There is an incredible scene, right? And great dark comic. I don't know if it was intentional or unintentional. This moment is when Jeffrey Dahmer's dad gets home and goes, Jeff, what are you doing? Touching a young boy, like you're going to have to go to jail. Like, oh my God. And Dahmer goes, oh my God, Dad, I was just taking some photos. I guess I can't have hobbies then because now I'm off to jail. I guess that's it for me and hobbies. You always want me to have a hobby, Dad. This shows how manipulative Jeffrey Dahmer is. He's not a child in an adult's body. Do not have empathy for him. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he knows exactly how to twist himself into a victim at any point and be cruel to his grandma, to his dad, to his victims. Like, he's constantly playing the hard done by lonely type of guy until it comes to actually like committing these heinous acts, and then he's an absolute savage. I also think the way this show shifts focuses in the back end is kind of a masterstroke. The initial 4 to 5 episodes are incredibly Jeffrey Dahmer focused, and I really enjoy those 4 to 5 episodes. And I think for a lot of people who enjoy trashy true crime or obsessed with this sort of stuff, those 4 to 5 episodes are going to be the things they came for and the things they will leave for when the later episodes get more interested in the victims and the impact of Jeffrey Dahmer on a global scale, as well as on the town around him. But in my opinion, the back couple of episodes, the last 4 to 5 episodes, are some of the best TV I've seen in a while. I think the way the show kind of gets you into Jeffrey Dahmer's world for the first couple episodes and really has you sit in this vibe and then pulls you out of it and goes, okay, now it's time for the victims. This transition is marked by the incredible Tony Hughes episode, but after that, each episode gets really kind of involved in multiple victims' families. There is this incredible montage where the cops are showing up to every victim's family's house, and Tony Hughes' mother, who in the last episode had 10, 15, 20 minutes all to herself, is just a footnote amongst 20 other victims. It also comes full circle. You see the 2 siblings that were victims of Dahmer, one of which he abused but wasn't able to kill, and the other one he did actually murder. You see that come together. You meet their family. It's absolutely shattering.
Also, I forgot to mention, sorry, I love everything they do with the father of those 2 brothers. The way that one of the brothers is actually speaking for the father and the judge is kind of dismissing them, has clear racial bias. I also thought the dream sequence that the brother that survived and escaped Dahmer, the one that had the photos taken of him, that dream sequence he has of his father building a boat, and then Dahmer kind of disrupting that is incredibly haunting, effective, and just really striking.
And even still, the show is still cutting backwards and forwards through time, giving us more Dahmer backstory as well as showing some of these encounters. I think it's incredibly fascinating, and I love that even after Jeffrey Dahmer is sent to jail, the show keeps going. I know maybe if you haven't seen it, this sounds exhausting. It really makes you sit with maybe the dark, perverse entertainment you were getting from the first 4 episodes. It feels like the show is really trying to make you reckon with your own relationship with Jeffrey Dahmer and his legacy by showing just how awful the impacts were. I also think the show's exploration of civil rights and the effect that Jeffrey Dahmer had on the African American community is incredibly fascinating as well. I really enjoyed the conversation between the activist and Glenda. All right, so now we need to talk about Glenda Cleveland, because for the first 6 to 8 episodes, I really liked what they were doing with Glenda Cleveland's character. Now, yes, I do know that a lot of this was fictionalized. She is a real person, but she didn't actually live in the apartment complex. I believe her daughter did at some point, or her daughter used to tell her about what was going on with Jeffrey Dahmer, and then she made various calls to the police on her behalf. Basically, what they've done with Glenda Cleveland is she is an amalgamation. She is kind of a bunch of different people that lived in the apartment complex combined, all right? So a bunch of different stories she kind of serves to represent. So apparently the whole scene where someone was offered a sandwich from Jeffrey Dahmer that they suspected may have been human flesh did actually happen, just not to Glenda Cleveland, as well as various different interactions Glenda in the show has with Jeffrey Dahmer. But they kind of thought it was best to merge this into one character just for like storytelling reasons. I don't hate this, all right? And this is kind of the issue where it's like you are telling a true story, you do want to be respectful, but you also need to be able to make a show that works as a narrative and is compelling. And for 80% of this show, I thought Glenda Cleveland's arc was super compelling. I just find what they started to try and do with Glenda Cleveland really clunky and strange towards the end. So this is where we get into some of my negatives with the show. I was really enjoying Glenda Cleveland for like 80% of the show. What I started to struggle with was basically when the show tried to have like a mission statement or a goal or a message that it actually wanted us to take home other than just what the story was telling us. In my opinion, and I can't confirm this for sure, but it felt like Ryan Murphy knew he was going to get a lot of flack for making an entire show about Jeffrey Dahmer rather than the victims. And to kind of like get out of this, he wanted to attach the idea that, you know, we should make a memorial for the victims, for the families, you know? So he starts writing in towards the end of the season, Glenda Cleveland kind of campaigning to get a memorial built on Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment complex, like where the apartment used to be that has now been demolished. And there is a scene, to be fair, where someone working for the state or for the police or for the government in Milwaukee actually says, you know what, we've talked to a bunch of people who think it's better to just like let this side be. You know, we don't want to immortalize Jeffrey Dahmer and what he did. The community just wants to move on. Now, obviously, everyone's going to have different opinions on the memorial thing. My personal opinion, however, just to throw my hat in the ring, right, is if I had a son, right, Marshall Stannis Jr. gets abducted, gets taken to someone's house after school, and has a bunch of awful things done to him, and is then murdered and dissolved in a barrel, and also the person that does this happens to like munch on him a bit. And then, you know, throughout the investigation, the house gets knocked down. And then people are like, oh, we're going to make a memorial for Marshall Stannis Jr. Where should we put it? Should we put something along the beach or something on his favorite park? No. Let's put it where all that awful shit happened to him. That sounds awesome. I would not like that. I would not like that. That's me personally. Now, you could make the argument that the whole thing is like this idea of reclaiming the space. I still don't know. Like, if you make a memorial where Jeffrey Dahmer lived, where all these things went down, it's still going to be about Jeffrey Dahmer. Like, people, like, especially if you make it like all the different victims, people are just going to show up to look at it and be like, damn, there's all of Jeffrey Dahmer's victims. Wow. There's no way that can kind of be avoided. I think the better approach is for each person, they get their own individualized memorial. Wouldn't it be way better if like Tony Hughes got a scholarship named after him at deaf schools, or a deaf school named after him, or other victims got, you know, like, you know, plaques in their favorite park or something? Like, I don't know, but that's me personally. Also, not that I'm particularly religious or spiritual, but even for me, like symbolically, forever being tied to this location where this awful stuff happened to you, like immortalized there, it feels strange. And I know you could make the argument that, you know, when people crash their cars and pass away, we put flowers there. but one, that isn't forever, and two, that's usually something that was by accident and at their own hands. It feels very strange to put it somewhere where someone else decided what their fate was, in my opinion. All right, people are allowed to disagree. What I struggle with in the show is that victims' families flat out said, we don't want a memorial at the site of Jeffrey Dahmer. Like, multiple families have been like, we're not interested in a memorial. And Ryan Murphy is like, nah, fuck yeah. Like, the final ending message of our show is going to be this memorial. And it feels like it's pushing something down your throat. It doesn't make sense for Glenda Cleveland's character unless she's really wrapped with guilt over her failings to protect victims and she's trying to forgive herself by doing something. Her level of not giving upness just feels like Ryan Murphy is trying to speak through this character to us, so we go online and go on Twitter and start demanding that Milwaukee kind of like make a memorial that the families don't want. It's very strange in my opinion. And the reason I say this is because that's where the show ends. It shows all the victims' photos and then it cuts to like a title card and it's like, to this day, a memorial has not been made. And I agree it sucks that like individualized memorials have not been made, but in terms of like the idea that was presented in the show, there's this idea that like there should be a one-stop shop for all the victims of Dahmer where he lived. I think that's insane. Also, is it going to include the victims of Dahmer that were murdered at different houses before he moved to the apartment complex? Because that feels fucking strange to me. I know I've been going on about this for a while, but the reason it bugs me so much is it really just feels transparent to me that Ryan Murphy couldn't just sit with the show he created and really wanted to be like, see, there's something bigger. We're trying to inspire change. And it's like, as an audience member, you're just like, but I don't, what are you doing? Like, I was enjoying the show. This feels confusing and muddled and kind of rushed. I gave a lot of credit for how tasteful I thought a lot of things in Dahmer were. I thought the murders were very restrained. I thought the emphasis was obviously on how Jeffrey Dahmer was evil rather than like how he was misunderstood or how we should have some understanding for how he got here. I thought the show did a really good job of walking the line of showing us Dahmer without making him a hero. However, for all that good grace I can give it for being tasteful, I thought the John Wayne Gacy conclusion in the last episode was fucking insane and so tasteless. And I've seen no one talk about this. First off, it's treated like a Marvel cameo. Like, it's the last episode of Dahmer. We've watched all this insane shit. And then it opens with like a John Wayne Gacy cameo where, compared to all the Dahmer murders that are off screen and kind of restrained and framed as really tragic, sad events, this one feels like, oh, you get to see John Wayne Gacy in action. Look how savage and horrific he was. It feels very like navel gazy and very like for like weird true crime people that are like, wow, that was like so fucked up. That was really pushing the boundaries, bro. It feels extreme and silly. And you know what? If this was like a dumb fictional Blumhouse horror movie, like, fine. You know, if I was watching a movie about a fictional serial killer, just, you know, and the point of that movie was like gory kills, whatever. But this show is talking about victims and greater societal impacts and all this stuff. And this specific scene feels like it belongs in Friday the 13th, where the point is the spectacle of the murder. It was tasteless. It was silly. It went on for ages. Then they have John Wayne Gacy dress up in clown makeup. This is everything I worried the show was going to be, based on like reviews of the show and based on how people were talking about it online. Now, in saying that, I do like the comparison that is brought up later in the episode between John Wayne Gacy and Jeffrey Dahmer, where John Wayne Gacy gets kind of like a peaceful end, right? He's put down, he's put to sleep, he dies from lethal injection. Whereas Dahmer is bludgeoned and beaten to death in a horrific, gory manner by a fellow inmate who is kind of taking it upon himself to serve as vengeance for the victims. This contrast is really well done. It's really, really, really well done. Because say what you will about Dahmer, he is awful, but his murders, for the most part, he was trying to not hurt them in the moment and put them to sleep and then do what he wants with their bodies, which is still horrific. I'm not saying he's a good guy, but John Wayne Gacy was clearly the more violent, awful, like kind of took sick joy in it. Whereas Dahmer, it was like killing was a means to an end to then have someone close to him, have a body close to him. Again, not defending Dahmer. Don't get it twisted. I think the contrast between the two and the fact that John Wayne Gacy was given a sort of peaceful end and Dahmer was given this violent end is interesting. In saying that, though, Dahmer was also walking around prison, baiting people, making jokes at the victims' expenses. And yes, it is very clear to me that he doesn't take joy in kind of mocking the victims the same way he doesn't really take joy in mocking the disabled, but it's more so because society seems to enjoy that and he's trying to blend in. I found that interesting, the comparison of him making fun of like eating the thumb in jail and the way he mocked the disabled earlier in the season. I found that contrast really interesting and fascinating, and I hope it was intentional. Talking about other interesting contrast moments, I love the shot where he's mixing sugar or something into the chocolate when he's working at the chocolate factory, and it's very reminiscent of how he mixes drugs into drinks. I thought every single victim section was really good. While we are talking about negatives, though, the title, Dahmer, monster, whatever, the Jeffrey Dahmer story.
Niecy Nash Betts, Dahmer Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story.
Niecy Nash Betts, Dahmer Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story.
Now, I have, talked with people, multiple conversations about how absurd this title is. And it's not even just for Netflix. All right, it's not like the original title was Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story. It was Dahmer, Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story. And the reason I know this is because when Evan Peters won the award, they had to read out, the award goes to Evan Peters for Dahmer Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story.
And the Golden Globe goes to Evan Peters, Dahmer Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story.
It is such a bad title. I hate it. Now, here's the thing. Ages ago, Monster was released with Charlize Theron.
The thing no one ever realized about me was that I could train myself into anything.
And it is very similar to Dahmer. Not in its presentation, but very similar in the sense of like fly on the wall portrayal of real life serial killer. Some empathy is given, some understanding is given, some explanation is given, but still horrific and harrowing. Charlize Theron won the Oscar for that. I think Ryan Murphy likes what they did in that movie, and he wants to do that in TV show form. All right. And he was like, oh, what a good idea. So I've got American Crime Story where each season is a different story. I've got American Horror Story where each season is a different story. Now I want to do these stories of true life killers, true life horrific crimes. I'm going to call it Monster. And I think it might have been for copyright reasons. Maybe he just didn't want to call it flat out Monster. Whatever. So then he went, okay, I'm going to call it Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story, but if Monster is the main title, people are probably going to miss what it's about. So for this first season, I'm just going to have to put Dahmer right there, then Monster, then the Jeffrey Dahmer story. So I think the giant Dahmer is tacked on. I think the original title was clearly meant to be Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story. And the reason this is confirmed is because season 2 is going to be Monsters, the Lyle and Eric Menendez story. So I think what Ryan Murphy wants to do is eventually Monster/Monsters is his series. And then eventually the cultural conversation is, oh, what season of Monster are you watching? Oh, I'm watching the Jeffrey Dahmer one. Oh, I'm watching the Menendez brothers ones. Oh, I'm watching the Jesse Smollett one. You get what I mean? And I think that is a really cool titling scheme. I just think calling it Dahmer Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story, just so you can have that giant Dahmer on Netflix, kind of bit them in the balls because it just does not flow off the tongue. But yeah, I think this show is a lot better than people give it credit for. I do actually think people are being a bit knee-jerk reaction or like, oh, we need to review bomb this because we don't want people empathizing with Jeffrey Dahmer. I think the people that are going to empathize with Jeffrey Dahmer were always going to do that. I don't think this show is the thing doing that. I also love that this show is expansive. I love that we get to the point where it's people arguing over what they're going to do with his brain. Like, it is his story from beginning to end. I love the whole section where the guy buys all the items that were going to be auctioned off because he thinks it's tasteless. I think the show does a really good job of giving you a bunch of like insights and viewpoints on how to look back on this situation, where the cops failed, why Dahmer was the way he was, what it says about him, what it says about society that he was able to get away with this for so long. And in terms of what I think the kind of purpose of this show is or what it offers to society, because I've seen a lot of videos being like, why does Dahmer exist? It shouldn't exist. It has no purpose. I disagree. Now, when Netflix says, oh, we were doing it to raise awareness, I don't buy that for a fucking second. They were not sitting there going, we need to make a PSA about stranger danger or failings of police work in the gay and African American community, and we're going to do that by making the show Dahmer. No, I think they knew true crime was big, and they were like, cool, we're going to make a show about that. But in saying that, given the show we've got, I think there are some things you can take away from it. First off, I don't know how you raise your kids. I don't know how you were raised. When I was growing up, mum was very open to, showing me mature movies and TV shows from like a relatively young age. And I think I always had a good head on my shoulders and a good sense of caution and survival instincts for the most part. I always thought like, I'm not going to walk that way because I watched that movie that time where that happened. No. And, for the most part, I've got through life pretty well. I've been able to keep myself pretty safe, stay out of situations. When I start getting the red flag in the back of my head, I'm like, all right, I'm out. Don't want to be here anymore. I do think these sort of shows serve as a good warning for people. Like I was watching this show, I was like, yeah, like if I ever went to a bar, I would be very careful of watching my drink because I don't want some weird fuck like Dahmer coming over. Like, yeah, that's the first takeaway you can get. But also, I think in a sense, it's also a really good show to watch how these sort of people get away with these sort of things to look out for, like, if this person is exhibiting this sort of antisocial behavior, maybe I let someone know, maybe I tell them. Now, I don't think that is the reason the show was made, but I do think it's a bonus kind of positive that you can get from the show, a bonus side effect of kind of understanding that there are some dark people in the world and what makes them the way they are and what to look out for. Even as a parent, right, you see the failings of Jeffrey Dahmer's parents. You see how the dad had little moments where he could have helped, but he didn't help enough. You see him reckon with that. You also see the fact that like the mum leaving when she did and the dad being off with his new girlfriend when he was, created this perfect storm where Dahmer had a whole house at his disposal to murder. I'm going to have to defend it. It was one of the best things I've seen recently. I had such a good time watching the show. But you know what? Evan Peters crushed it. Ryan Murphy did a great job with a lot of the direction and the writing, and I think the way it was structured and the way it looked and the way it's performed was all very, very well done. And I think the fact that it has been harshly review bombed is a shame. And the reason I'm reviewing this is because Monsters, Eric and Lyle Menendez is coming out soon. And I kind of want to get ahead of the discourse and have this video for people to come back to if they enjoyed me talking about that season. Be sure to subscribe, like for more of my thoughts on things. Thank you so much for watching and have a lovely day.